What's going on, everybody? Anthony Servino here with the Face Off Sports Network with my top fantasy football waiver wire targets for NFL Week 11. Let's get right into it. Audric Estime, if you need a running back, he is your top priority this week. Audric Estime coming off of a Week 10 matchup on paper when it comes to fantasy production. It was not impressive. Only 5.3 PPR points, but let's read in between the lines. He played a season high 25 offensive snaps previously. His season best was 7. Meanwhile, Javonte Williams plays a season low 16 offensive snaps. But wait, there's more. Audric Estime gets a season high 14 carries for 53 yards. Meanwhile, Javonte Williams, a total of 3 touches for 7 yards. Out of that, 1 carry for 1 yard. This was a very good Chiefs run defense that Estime managed to get going a little bit for 3.8 yards per carry. Now, here's a disclaimer. In PPR, right now, it looks like Estime will not provide value. He has yet to receive a single target all season long. What we are buying into is the possibility that Audric Estime is going to be the lead back moving forward. We have to take in consideration that Javonte Williams is not a Sean Payton guy. He is from the old regime. And since Payton has been there, he's been cleaning house from the OG players. And Javonte Williams could be next. His role could be decimated down the stretch. And that early down in between the tackles, grinding type of rushing load is going to go on the shoulders of Audric Estime. He had 2 red zone rushes this week against Kansas City. Against Baltimore, he only had 5 carries for 35 yards, 2 of which came inside the 10-yard line. He also had a red zone carry in week 8 against Carolina. So 3 straight weeks involved in the red zone despite not scoring. We are prioritizing Audric Estime in week 11. Up next, wide receiver Ricky Pearsall from the San Francisco 49ers. We know this is a loaded 49ers offense full of fantasy value skill position players. And oh, by the way, they're finally getting healthy. This week, CMC is back. Debo is back. Jennings is back. Kittle is playing some of the best football of his career. Meanwhile, he's also consistent for the first time in a long time on a week-to-week basis in fantasy football. But Ricky Pearsall strings together another productive outing. Remember, going into the bye against Dallas, he had 4 of 4 targets for 38 yards. He also had a rush for 39 yards. 11.7 PPR points coming off the bye against Tampa, despite everyone being healthy. Plays 38 offensive snaps. He gets 6 targets, hauling in 4 for 73 and a big touchdown. 17.3 PPR points, which was more than Debo Samuel. Ricky Pearsall in 3 wide sets is starting, and he is a Debo or Jennings injury away from taking on an even larger role. Now, when it comes to target share, he matched 6 targets with Debo. We know Jennings led the pack with 11. Kittle, I believe, had 4. CMC had 7. This ball is going to be spread around. Brock Purdy is going to distribute the football like the point guard, but it looks, at least right now, Ricky Pearsall and Brock Purdy, they have a connection, and Pearsall is going to be used moving forward. We should be adding Ricky Pearsall Jr. Up next, here's a name. Marquez Valdes-Scantling. And if you know me through the years, he's a guy I just can't quit, even though I should. But this year, I drafted him a ton in best ball, Mr. Irrelevant, my last pick, and he had that pop game this week. He goes for 25.9 PPR points, only 3 targets, but caught all 3 for 109 and a touchdown. A vintage MVS game. Well, if you drafted him in best ball, you got value from that pick. But I think there's possibly more juice to be squeezed from the lemon. Marquez Valdes-Scantling enters that big play role in the Saints Kubiak offense. Remember that role that was helping Rashid Shaheed break out. Shaheed, the old big play guy, done for the year. They've struggled to fill that role. MVS could be the guy. Now, granted, good matchup against Atlanta, but he's going to have a few chances down the stretch to pop again. Notably, this week against the Cleveland Browns, an even worse secondary than with the Atlanta Falcons put on the football field coming out of their Week 12 bye. You got the Rams, you know you can throw on them. You got Washington. So a couple of nice spots down here for MVS. I'm not telling you, hey, add this guy and use him every week, but if you're stricken with injuries, if you have an extra extra bench spot, if you have an expendable player, if there's bye weeks affecting you, or let's say you in a Thursday night matchup and you play Jamar Chase one week and somebody goes off and you're down big points and you're like, oh, I can put in a high floor wide receiver or I put in a high ceiling guy like MVS in a good matchup. He's the type of guy that just might be able to win you a week. Let's go to my next. That's Jaylen Warren. Now, Jaylen Warren, we know the deal in Pittsburgh. He is second banana to Najee Harris. And Najee Harris is having an outstanding year. But Jaylen Warren, we know, is going to be involved. He was a little bit sluggish to open the year, dealing with the injury. Didn't look right. Coming back from the injury, Jaylen Warren is starting to look like himself. Now, Najee Harris did get a little bit banged up last week against Washington. However, Najee looks fine. There's nothing on the early injury reports that are suggesting he could miss time, but that doesn't mean we shouldn't pick up Jaylen Warren because Jaylen Warren is starting to get on the football field. He has now logged 3 straight games with at least 25 snaps, 2 of those games over 33 snaps. And last week against Washington, Najee, Warren, 34 snaps each. In week 7 against the Jets, they both had 33 snaps each. And in the middle against the Giants, 37-25, leading in the direction of Najee. But this is telling. They're both going to be used, even though Najee is going to hold more fantasy value. He's the prototypical Arthur Smith guy. Jaylen Warren has a unique skill set as a receiver out of the backfield, as a change of pace back. This week, 11.5 PPR points, a season high. 14 carries, season high, 66 yards, season high, 29 yards receiving, season high. We are starting to see the best version of Jaylen Warren. Now, down the stretch, it is terrible in terms of matchups. Every team from week 11 to 17 are top 10 teams against enemy running backs, but I don't know if that matters. Pittsburgh runs the ball well. They're running efficiently. And now that they have a competent passing attack with Russell Wilson and George Pickens, they added Mike Williams. You can't just stack the box against the Steelers anymore. You have to defend the pass. You have to defend the big play. So there could be more open running lanes despite the bad matchups. We are adding Jaylen Warren. Let's go next. Gus Edwards. Gus is back coming off the injury in his first game. Feels like Audric Estime all over again, what I said in the beginning. This guy's touchdown dependent. He's behind J.K. Dobbins. But Gus Edwards logged his 3rd game of the year with at least 10 carries, 55 yards, his 2nd highest total of the year. He does not catch passes. He only has 1 target. But he looks healthy. He's an effective runner. He's a change of pace back. He's also one of the most valuable handcuffs because if J.K. Dobbins goes down, that prominent workload is going to go in the direction of Gus Edwards. But in terms of a week-to-week fantasy asset, you got to be careful. You got to temper expectations because Gus Bus needs to score 9 times out of 10 to return value as long as J.K. Dobbins is healthy and on the field. Let's go to another prominent handcuff, Khalail Herbert. And let's forget about the debut of Khalail Herbert. He had 2 offensive snaps. I believe he took a handoff and fumbled it. You know how it works in the NFL. Like Herbert was on the team for a few days. They activated him. They tried to give him a carry. And you need to work. You need to practice taking these handoffs. As simple as it sounds, you still need to work at it. And it just wasn't there. I don't think anybody's going to ding Khalail Herbert. I don't think Zach Taylor's going to be like, all right, you're going to go behind Travion Williams. No, Khalail Herbert is the primary handcuff to Chase Brown. And Chase Brown is proving he can handle a workload. But with his build, Chase Brown, I don't know if he's the type of guy that can handle 18 to 20 touches a game, which means Khalail Herbert could eventually take over the old Zach Moss role. Now, Zach Moss early in the year had a prominent workload, but the last few games leading up to his season-ending neck injury, he was getting around 8 to 10 touches a game, which I foresee for Khalail Herbert once he gets acclimated on a week-to-week basis. So we're picking up Herbert, number one. If you're really desperate, you could probably use him in a flex spot as long as he's getting that 8 to 12, 10 touch range. But if Chase Brown was to miss time, then Khalail Herbert could be a lock and loaded RB1 because we saw Zach Moss do it in this offense this year. We saw Chase Brown do it in this offense this year. This is a running back friendly offense. Why? Because they are so prolific passing the football. There's a lot of open running lanes. Let's go to DeMario Pop Douglas. And Pop Douglas is a guy, and I've had him on this waiver wire video a few weeks now. He needs to be rostered. He wasn't impressive this week, only 9 PPR points, but he is a high floor guy. He has given us at least 9 PPR points in back-to-back games, and he's had 4 games this year with over 10 PPR points. This is a wide receiver room by committee. This week we saw Butte get involved. We saw Jalen Polk get involved. Hunter Henry's involved. But if Drake May is on the field, it's going to be a more efficient passing attack. And Pop Douglas down the stretch, he could provide some value. Here's some context. The 4 games in which he returned double-digit PPR points, he also had 9 targets in every one of those games. So if Pop Douglas begins to get more volume, he's going to return, at least this is what the trend says, a high floor game. You get matchups against Indy, Zona down the stretch. There's a couple of spots to where if you're in a bind, you need to use Pop Douglas. You could do a hell of a lot worse. Let's start winding down. Let's go to Mike Williams. Mike Williams, folks, he did not play a lot against Baltimore against Washington this week, but he had the game-winning touchdown. Played 9 offensive snaps. Why? Was on the field for a few days. Gets his only target, cashes it in for a 32-yard touchdown. Similar skill set to George Pickens. These are big play receivers. Well, what does Russell Wilson do best? He throws the ball up, and he lets his big-time wide receivers win the contested catch and make the big play. I think this is a terrific fit for Mike Williams. And with George Pickens on the other side, Mike Williams will not see top-end coverage. I think if it doesn't happen this week, it's going to happen next week. Mike Williams going to ascend on the depth chart over Calvin Austin, over Van Jefferson, and ascend to that number 2 wide receiver role. Not a high-volume passing attack, but this passing attack right now is super efficient since Russell Wilson has taken over. And if you look, we talked about the Steelers' schedule against running backs. It is a gauntlet of bad matchups down the stretch, completely the opposite for wide receivers. These are, you get Baltimore, Cleveland, these division matchups. Their secondaries outside of like Pittsburgh and the AFC North, they're not really good. There's some really nice spots to where Mike Williams could be a big-time fantasy asset down the stretch and in the fantasy playoffs. Speaking of Pittsburgh, let's go to Russell Wilson. And this is the 3rd Steeler on this list, and I can't believe I'm saying it, but the Steelers are a hell of a fantasy team right now. Since Russ has taken over, we are starting to see everybody start producing fantasy-wise. Arthur Smith, I get it. He's a laughingstock in the NFL sometimes. There's a reason why he got that Atlanta head coaching job is because what he did in Tennessee with A.J. Brown, Derrick Henry, Ryan Tannehill, it was prolific. It worked. And I'm not saying that he has the same talent, right? Because Najee isn't Derrick Henry. And George Pickens, we don't think yet. I mean, I think he's really good. He's not A.J. Brown, but I think he's really good. Ryan Tannehill, Russell Wilson's probably a wash. Like, there's enough here for this offense down the stretch to be something special I'm all in on Pittsburgh. They're trying to win a Super Bowl. They're trying to win a division. I think they have all the tools to do it. That means for the first time in a long time, if they get to a shootout, they have the tools to not only stay in the game, they have the tools to win the game. Russell Wilson right now, folks, let's call it what it is. Since taking over, 3 straight games with at least 18 quarterback points, 2 of which over 22. He has thrown at least 2 touchdowns in 2 out of 3 games. He is getting it, and he also rushed for a touchdown. He is getting it done every which way. 2 of those games over 264 yards passing. And again, we just talked about it with Mike Williams. The passing schedule for Steelers fantasy assets, including Russ, is outstanding down the stretch. If you need a quarterback, forget Aaron Rodgers, forget Drake May. Go get Russell Wilson. He's going to potentially win you a fantasy league if you're in a bind. Let's close out with my only tight end on the list, Theo Johnson. We know tight end rookies sometimes break late unless you're an elite guy like Brock Bowers or Laporta last year. But Theo Johnson, I think, is going to be a special player in the future, but especially possibly down the stretch with the Giants' offensive line woes. We might see Drew Lock. I think they're going to lean on Theo Johnson more. Now, forget about Daniel Bellinger. He's not even in the mix. Theo Johnson has been dominating snap share this season, and it's not even close. He has played 550 total snaps this year. The next closest guy, Manhurts, 192, Bellinger, 110. This is his tight end room. He's an excellent receiver, big body guy, versatile guy. And the past few weeks he's coming on, he's had at least 4 targets in 3 straight games. But in back-to-back games, he's had 6 targets. He goes for 14 fantasy points against Washington, 7 last week against Carolina. 4 for 37. If he gets a touchdown, he's in the double digits again. Down the stretch, the Giants have a really positive schedule for tight ends coming out of the bye. Tampa, Dallas, New Orleans, Baltimore, Atlanta, Indy in the fantasy championship. Outside of Dallas and New Orleans, who are middle of the pack, every one of those opponents are bottom 12 positive matchups. We are picking up Theo Johnson. He could potentially help you win a fantasy league in the fantasy playoffs.